Welcome to the Daily Dispatch. First up, we're covering news of opposing speeches from the Russian and Ukrainian presidents on New Year's Eve as the war in Europe continues. Then, we'll talk about military advancements and missile tests in North and South Korea, with both countries doubling down on increasing their defensive and offensive capabilities. And for our last headline, we'll be breaking down the UN vote on the Israeli occupation of Palestine and how the Palestinians are responding to it. We're here to give you news and to help you infer the world around you. I'm Osama Nizamani, and here's your Daily Dispatch. We've regularly been covering developments in the Russia-Ukraine war over the past month, and today we bring you updates from New Year's address by presidents from both sides, with little signaling towards an end to the war. Russian President Vladimir Putin justified the war with Ukraine through his annual New Year's address, labeling it the frontier against the Western liberal elite's hegemony. He remarked 2022 was an year marked by difficult but necessary decisions for Russia's full independence. President Putin also criticized the West's role in the war, remarking the West was lying about peace while preparing for an aggression. They're cynically using Ukraine and its people to weaken and split Russia. On the other side, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called out Russia for following the devil. Speaking in Russia to address the people of Russia, he suggested that the war was not one being fought against the expansion of NATO, but rather to keep President Putin in power. The Ukrainian president also reiterated the need for the West to continue supporting Ukraine through the conflict. Such polarizing statements from both sides do not bode well for the future of the conflict, with neither party willing to back down from their current position. Considering Russia's existing military capabilities, and with Ukraine continuing to be aided by its Western allies, such as the recent announcement of Patriot missiles and a nearly $2 billion package by the Biden administration, the larger situation on the ground is likely to remain in deadlock. And as winter season and the turn of the year hit, experts suggest the biggest land war in Europe since the end of the World War II looks likely to continue without any resolution in sight, a threat to both the region and many other countries in the world affected by the conflict. For our next dispatch, we're covering news of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un ordering an exponential expansion of North Korea's nuclear arsenal, coupled with the calls for the development of most advanced intercontinental ballistic missiles and a record number of ballistic tests this year. The statement is in line with North Korea's display of intent through 2022, countering what the North Korean leader calls U.S. hostility, with beefing up their military and nuclear arsenal. These developments follow from last month when North Korea claimed to have performed key tests needed for development of a new strategic weapon, a possible reference to a solid-fueled ICBM and a spy satellite. Authorities from North Korea proclaimed the development of an intercontinental ballistic missile will equip them with the capability of a nuclear counterstrike, with security experts suggesting such capabilities will enable the country with the option of striking the U.S. The development of these capabilities has come under strong criticism from the United States and other Western countries. The South Korea's defense ministry reiterating on Sunday that any attempt to use nuclear weapons by North Korea will lead to the end of the Kim Jong-un government. South Korea is also developing homegrown combat weapons, defense and surveillance systems to enhance its military capabilities as tensions in the region rise. The head of the South Korea's State Arms Procurement Agency told the Korea Herald that the completion of the homegrown three-axis defense systems, consisting of the kill chain preemptive strike mechanism, the Korea air and missile defense, and the Korea massive punishment and retaliation, is vital to boosting South Korea's deterrence abilities. Rising tensions, coupled with nuclear capabilities at play in the region, have raised security concerns from many countries, as well as global bodies, with experts suggesting that there is a need for both the West as well as other powers in the world, to assist in de-escalation between the two countries, even if they do remain split on whether the path forward is negotiations or dialing up the pressure on North Korea. On to our next story. A resolution calling on the Hague-based International Court of Justice, ICJ, to give an opinion on the legal consequences of Israel's illegal occupation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem has also been passed in the United Nations General Assembly. 87 members voted in favor of the resolution, and 26, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany, opposed it, while 53 states abstained from voting. The Palestinian leadership has welcomed the decision, calling it a victory of Palestinian diplomacy, while Israel has rejected what it calls a distorted UN resolution and has in past also accused ICJ of being politically motivated. The UN General Assembly resolution comes at a time as a new far-right government led by Benjamin Netanyahu promises to expand illegal settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. More than 500,000 Israelis live in these settlements. The ICJ last passed a ruling on the Israel-Palestine conflict in 2004, when it declared Israel's wall separation in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem contrary to international law and thus illegal. The International Court of Justice is the top UN court that deals with disputes arising between states. Although its rulings and decisions are binding, it lacks on enforcing mechanism. On to our next story. The World Health Organization has asked China to share data on the country's increasing COVID-19 cases, including data on disease impact, hospitalizations, intensive care unit admissions, and the number of deaths. The WHO has said in its official statement that sharing real-time data on the epidemiological situation would help the global community to formulate accurate risk and assessment and response measures. The agency's call comes as China grapples with a steeping surge in infections since the lifting of its strict zero COVID, with cases reaching about 5,000 a day. In the face of anger and widespread protests, Beijing abandoned its zero COVID policy 3 weeks ago. An increase in infection rates has raised concerns around the world, with some countries imposing COVID tests for travelers coming from China. Meanwhile, in a first televised speech since the lifting of strict restrictions, Chinese President Xi Jinping signaled that China would not revert to its zero COVID policy, as he called for unity as the country entered a new phase in combating the pandemic. Moving on to our next dispatch. In an attempt to end the civil war in Colombia once and for all, President Gustavo Petro has announced a ceasefire with the last remaining 5 armed groups in the country. The ceasefire would last till June 2023, but could be extended if both sides adhere to the terms of the ceasefire and peace talks make progress. Among the armed groups include leftist guerrilla militant organization, the National Liberation Army, ELN, and dissident factions of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC. The latter had signed a peace agreement with Bogota in 2016, agreeing to disarm and demobilize in exchange for amnesty and political participation. The FARC was one of the largest and most violent rebel groups in Colombia. As we covered in one of our previous dispatches, Colombia has reeled from a civil war for almost 6 decades. Close to 500,000 people died, rural areas saw a massive displacement of people, and a huge boom in the opium trade war was witnessed as militant groups were accused of establishing links with drug mafias. Since his coming into power in 2022, President Gustavo Petro has redoubled efforts to establish durable and lasting peace in Colombia by resuming talks with the last remaining militant organizations. We've already told you about the diverging speeches from the Russian and Ukrainian president. We also bring you news of the latest developments on the ground, as New Year's night saw a fresh barrage of missile attacks in Ukraine. Kyiv and other regions were targeted, with air defense rockets intercepting a majority of the missiles. Ukrainian officials voiced their protests against the strikes, with President Zelensky calling out Moscow for assaulting civilian and infrastructural targets. This latest aerial offensive comes on the back to similar strikes 2 days ago, with the movement of Russian forces on the ground having halted in East and South Ukraine, and experts suggest the coming phase of the war remains to be dominated by aerial battles between Russian missiles and air defense systems and drones provided to the Ukraine by its allies. That's all, folks. We'll be happy to receive your suggestions and feedback. We'll be back tomorrow with more bite-sized news that keeps you up to date with what's going on in the country, the region, and the globe. I'm Usama Nizamani, and this was your Daily Dispatch.